Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this oral evidence session of the Welsh Affairs Select Committee. My name is Ruth Jones, Member of Parliament for Newport West and Islwyn, and I'm also chair of this committee. And I am delighted to be joined today by First Minister Eluned Morgan, and this is your first time attending as First Minister, yes. I believe. Yes, which is great. So thank you so much for joining us today. We appreciate that you're not obliged to appear in front of us like the Secretary of State for Wales, so we are very grateful for you to come, and also for coming in person. It is really helpful to have you here in front of the committee like this. So, and we obviously want to talk about the relationship between the UK and the Welsh Government, so this is a perfect opportunity for that, so thank you so much. I'm going to start by asking any members to declare any interest that have any relevance to today's session.
I'd like to declare an interest in the agricultural question as a tenanted dairy farmer.
Thank you, Anne Davis. Brilliant. Okay, I'm now going to, I believe the First Minister, you have an opening statement you'd like to make?
Well, just a few words. I think I just wanted to note, really, that we've lost a statesman in Wales in the past week, David Ellis-Thomas, who, of course, was a member of this committee, I think, from 87 to 89. He made a huge contribution to nation building in Wales, and I think we all owe him a huge debt of honour, and I just wanted to note that today because he was a member of this committee, so I hope he'll indulge me. Diolch hefyd, thank you for the opportunity to speak today. You know, it's not something I'm going to make a habit of, but I thought it was important, you know, because I'm a new First Minister, to give you that opportunity to you know, for us to get to know each other. I really recognise and value the work that you do. I think it's really good for politicians to be, you know, ask questions. You know, we're all accountable. I'm accountable, obviously, to the Senedd rather than to you, but it's good to be here. And then just I just thought it would be just worth setting out, you know, since I became First Minister, what I've done is that I did a listening exercise throughout the country. I went, it was a very open-ended and unscientific approach, but it was a genuine attempt to get a sense of what the people want in Wales. And as a result of that, I came back, set out 4 key priorities that people told me that we should be focusing on. NHS was definitely top of that list. Developing new jobs in Wales and prosperity. Then making sure we connect communities and also make sure that we have opportunities for all, and that includes things like housing and education. So those are the priorities. I've then steered the entire government to try and respond to those priorities as priorities. Not to say we're not doing other things, but that's our main focus, and the budget proposals are in line and in keeping with those priorities.
Thank you for this, Minister, and thank you for those comments on Lord David. I mean, he was a giant in this place, and you know, although he was at the other end, so to speak, as you would know, he was a massive contributor in every way. So thank you so much for that. That's really good. And you've set out very clearly, we know what your priorities are. And I suppose my question to you is, following your listening exercise and your missions or priorities, if you like, is the Welsh Government sufficiently resourced and adequately supported by the UK Government to actually get your priorities delivered?
Well, look, you know, any government is going to say, I'd love some more money because you could do more of what you want to do. So you clearly have to adapt and adjust to the money that you have available to you. And I guess it's about where you put your emphasis, and that's what governing means, is that you have to choose. You have to choose where you put your priorities. Obviously, the more money you have, the more you can prioritise and deliver. And, you know, for the first time, we've got a huge uplift in a number of years. We've got the biggest uplift we've seen since the beginning of devolution, £1.5 billion extra to help spend on those priorities, to help bring waiting lists down, for example, and to which is really significant after a long time of austerity. So I think it's just worth emphasising that. And obviously, you know, we're not there yet. We've got a budget to get through, and you know, the arithmetic in the Senedd is not straightforward. But for me, it's really important that we recognise that additional funding is coming. It's not just revenue, it's capital. And capital is really important. So we've got £3 billion extra in terms of capital. And, this matters because it means you can invest in transformational projects. And that's part of the frustration we've had, is that the limit on capital in the past has been very, very marginal. I think we had £1 million last year uplift in terms of capital for the entire Welsh budget. So it's a £3 billion uplift is not insignificant. So it just means that we can start thinking about, and we can invest in things like diagnostics, which will speed up the whole process for patients and things. In an ideal world, particularly when it comes to capital, what you need is a longer time horizon. So, I've just been speaking to Wendy Alexander, for example, Transport Secretary. You can't build a railway or a station. You can't do that in a year. It takes longer than that. So you do need a broader time horizon. So I'm hopeful that the spring statement will give you that broader time horizon, and in turn will give us that broader time horizon so that we can plan for the future in a more effective way, because annual budgeting is frustrating.
Thank you very much. I'm going to hand over to Steve Witherden, please.
Diolch. Prynawn, First Minister. You've described health and social care as your top priorities. Now, we took evidence 3 weeks ago on how interconnected the Welsh and English NHS systems are, and how frequently patients have to travel across the border for treatment. Mm-hmm. In this context, what do you need to see from the UK government to help you deliver a healthier Wales?
Thanks. Look, money is the number one thing that I need and I would like, and we've got a bit of extra money. But money, for example, to transform, you need to do things like make sure that we can have digital transformation. Now, again, that's not something you can do overnight. You have to do that over a number of years. And particularly when it comes to cross-border issues, that is a challenge. I mean, it's a challenge within England. So you've got health trusts in England that can't exchange information. So obviously we have a different mechanism between England and Wales. Look, I'm up for seeing to what extent we can try and get as much of this to speak to each other. I think that makes sense, particularly, you've got, Steve, you're on the border, Andrew, you're on the border. It really matters to people. Part of the issue there is who owns the data. So a lot of the data, particularly GPs, they own the data. So you've got to actually get into a dialogue with GPs about releasing the data. How do you, because obviously it's patient data, you've got to be very, very clear about how you manage it. And but we've just come to an agreement, for example, with GPs in Wales with their new contract to, for example, be able to share some of that data on the Welsh app, for example, a Welsh NHS app. So there are opportunities. I think that cross-border interconnected work is something that I'd like to explore further. But one of the things we've done is we've brought in a group of people who used to work for NHS executive in England, and some experts who, some of them have got Welsh roots and interest. And, they're bringing some of that expertise in to say, right, actually, where can we learn from each other? So I think there are real opportunities there.
Just had a quick follow-up. Steve mentions that inquiry we've had on cross-border, and we talked about in that process of the complaints management, we talked about bureaucracy in terms of the patient funding requests for cross-border referrals. You mentioned digitisation. I wonder, how confident are you in the health boards and trusts that they can deliver these kind of reforms that you've been talking about, particularly in the context of that additional funding you've just raised in terms of that 1.5 billion in additional funding?
Well, I mean, there are lots and lots of different aspects of this. Okay, so if you've got, there's more people who from England who are registered with GPs in Wales than the other way around. So it's very interesting. People are voting with their feet, actually, in terms of access to GPs. I think a lot of people find it easier to access GPs in Wales than they do in England. So we know that about 1.6 million appointments are made every month in a population of 3.1 million people. I mean, it's quite remarkable the amount of work that's getting done. So it's quite interesting that when it comes to GPs and primary care, actually in some areas we're way ahead, I think, of England, on things like pharmacies. So we've been, we're 7 years into a transformation programme. The kind of thing that Wes Streeting is talking about, we've been on it for a while. So things like, the three main things are moving resources into the community and primary care. So we've been doing that. If you look at what our pharmacy work, for example, there are tens of thousands of people now getting support in their pharmacies. There are 28 different conditions that you can get support for in your community pharmacy. In England, it's about 7. So we're, on optometry. Instead of just going to get your eyes tested, you now get them checked for other issues. Again, we're way ahead of England on some of those things. And obviously an area that is, we've got a long way to go further, but on dentistry, for example, we've already delivered 400,000 new NHS dental appointments. The target in England is 700,000, and we've already delivered 400,000. So there are some areas, we've got further to go, but I just think it's worth thinking about the context. So there's that. When it comes to more complicated things like individual patient funding requests, you get into a different kind of sphere, and we have things like the All Wales panel that determines whether a particular medicine is appropriate for somebody when it's kind of really super specialised. So the last thing you want is politicians deciding things like that. So we've got a panel of experts, and they determine, right, this is something that would work for this particular patient. So again, all of that, when it's super specialised, it may be that they can access that in England, but we pay for it in Wales. So it does depend on which part of health you're talking about in terms of that, how integrated things are.
Thank you very much. I'm going to move on to Andrew Ranger now, please.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, First Minister. In terms of the 4 priorities, one of the ones you mentioned was about connecting communities, which in North Wales we very, very much welcome. And particularly for communities such as mine on the border, the cross-border transport connections are absolutely vital to opportunity and growth. So I'd just be interested in how you would sort of assess recent progress on that and what your hopes are for the future as that progresses.
Great, well, thanks very much. And I'm pleased to say I've just come from a meeting with Heidi Alexander, who's the Secretary of State for Transport. There's been some really constructive discussions that have been undertaken between her department and Ken Skates as Transport Secretary in Wales. I'm pleased that she reiterated the point that there's a recognition that there has been underfunding in relation to rail transport in Wales, and I'm pleased that there's also a pipeline of rail enhancements that are now being prioritised. So no promises were made until the spring statement, but I'm pleased that we seem to be moving ahead in relation to that. And in terms of the cross-border aspect that you're talking about, I think that link, for example, into Liverpool, that is crucial, and it's cross-border and it's good for growth. And this government is all about growth. So if you can wrap it up in the growth agenda, I think it's more likely to get through the system. So I didn't get any promises, but there was certainly a recognition of the fact that we deserve more.
Thank you.
Yeah. And you've already mentioned now you're meeting with Heidi Alexander while you're here today, which is great. So the relationship between Welsh Government and UK Government, obviously we would, you've described it yourself as stronger now. How would you describe, I suppose, the role of things like the Council of Nations and Regions? Mm-hmm. What sort of difference has that made to intergovernment relations? And what sort of relationship would you like to see with the UK Government going forward?
Well, we've only had one meeting of the nations, councils and regions, and I think it was really good because rather than it just being a kind of discussion group, it was really focused on the growth agenda and investment, and so there was a really clear focus to it. And then that bounced straight into the investment summit, where again all of the leaders of the nations were present and represented. So look, it's definitely much better than the relationship was before. Look, I will always put Wales first and party, second. That is my responsibility as First Minister, and I will speak up for Wales when the needs of Wales absolutely need to be championed. And there are lots of examples where that needs to be done. In terms of the intergovernmental relations, there's obviously there's a review of intergovernmental relations being undertaken at the moment, but the machinery we think exists already. I don't think any of us want to see the intergovernmental machinery that already exists and the nations and regions. There's no point in, so how do we kind of get those to work together? So I think there's probably a bit of practical work around making sure there's no duplication and things like that. But the machinery exists, it just wasn't used much before. And there's a lot to discuss. I've just come from a meeting of all the European Union ambassadors, and they're really interested in the kind of devolution issue, because a lot of them have kind of federal nations, and they understand how it works. They're shocked by how centralised we are. But they're also really interested in, well, how does this work? Because before there was a framework, and the framework was the EU. There was a single market that was an EU single market, and we came out and suddenly, we had to create this new thing, and obviously we still have issues in relation to the UK internal market, which we think was imposed on us. So there are a few things to iron out in relation to some of those things.
I'll move on to Jill German, please.
Diolch, Chair. Croeso, First Minister.
Diolch.
I'd like to turn to criminal justice, if I may. So the joint work that UK and Welsh governments do is no more important than it is in that field, because the preventative agenda is very important to that, and that's a role that can be played together. So I just wondered, as things stand, how effectively you think the UK and Welsh governments work together to deliver criminal justice objectives across Wales?
Thanks. Well, so criminal justice is very much something that is UK government in their area. Obviously, what's important for us is that we try and get into that prevention space. It's quite interesting because obviously there's a review being undertaken at the moment in terms of, there's too many people in prisons and what do you do about it, and do you stop people from going to prisons, and if you do that, all of a sudden you're taking it from a reserved area, which is justice, and you're kind of going over to you, and then they don't give us the funding to sort it out in that kind of prevention space. So that is a conversation that we certainly need to have. You'll be aware that when it comes to youth justice, for example, where we think we have some of the tools available to us that are useful in that space. So if you think of the apprenticeships and education and housing and youth work, all of those things are quite important to avoid the kind of people going down the wrong path. And obviously there's probation as well. So So those are areas where we're still trying to see if there's any scope for us to go a little bit further in those spaces.
Okay, thank you. And just following up for that, so there's as part of the Safer Streets mission that the government has the UK government has voiced its ambition to halve knife crime and violence against women and girls within the decade. So I wondered how Welsh Government can support those aims and the practical work that can be done.
Thanks. Well, we've been on the issue of trying to address the issue of violence against women and girls in Wales for a long time, and there will always be more that we can do, but we have a very clear programme of work on that. Knife crime, we've seen some tragic issues recently, and clearly this is an issue where we have to take very seriously. You'd have seen that when it comes to guidelines for things like schools, that actually some of our guidelines are much stronger than they are in England already. So you're able, for example, to exclude somebody from school if they're carrying a knife. So there's all of these things that are we've actually gone a little bit further than they have in England, but I think all of this, things are moving in this space, and we need to be really, really vigilant. And I know that teachers, for example, are pretty sensitive, and understandably so, that they don't want to be police, they want to teach. And so I do think it's important that we get in very early. We're great believers in early years intervention. First 1,000 days, that's what matters. We've piled money into that, into making sure that children can have the best start in life, and try to put that support around them, and that includes parents, obviously.
Thank you. Yes, Mehdi, please.
Thank you. Yeah, from that, you just mentioned the youth justice there, and that you had it as a priority also in the UK, in the Labour manifesto. Have you had those conversations prior to the election to devolving youth justice? Because obviously the link that you mentioned there with those local services, especially the youth service, is paramount to support the youth justice work, and I think it would be delivered better locally as well.
Thanks. Well, there was a manifesto commitment to consider devolution of youth justice. So we've already had discussions with Pat McFadden about, what it is we can do in that space. In fact, I had a meeting yesterday with the Deputy First Minister, who's responsible for the constitutional aspects of what we do in Wales, and this is an area that he is seeing. Look, how far can we go? At what point? So he presented with me with a kind of what is possible before the next election. So we are taking it seriously. There are areas where clearly we want to go further than the UK government wants us to go, but there's a manifesto commitment, and we will hold them to it.
And one of those further places is policing, and you commissioned work yourself to look at policing in Wales, and have you discussed that further with the UK government and also the police commissioners in Wales and the policing in Wales? So
this is an area where there is perhaps a difference of view. So we've been clear in Welsh Government that policing is an area we'd like to see further devolution, but that is not necessarily where the UK Government is at this point.
Very much. Andrew Ranger, please.
Thank you. So I would like to move on to looking at public funding in Wales now. So obviously it was very welcome that in the autumn budget the block grant settlement for Wales was the highest in the history of devolution. And in your government's latest draft budget, you've stated that capital budgets have gone beyond what was expected. But in your view, has the UK government gone far enough to provide the investment funding that Wales needs?
Well, look, it's a damn sight better than it was before, and I'll always want more. So let's be clear about that. As it happens, I've just I had a meeting with the Chancellor this morning, and I'm pleased to say I think it was we've moved on constructively, in particular when it comes to the financial options open to the Welsh Government. I don't want to go into more detail on that until we've bottomed things out, but we did get some movement this morning, so I think that I hope will be of help to us.
And obviously we've got our spending review coming up in June, we think, later on this year. So you may not be able to answer this question, but how should the UK government support continued investment in Welsh infrastructure?
We've got a very clear infrastructure plan where we've set out these are the things we want to do, but what you need with infrastructure is long-term planning. So that was the conversation we were able to have with Wendy Alexander. She, of course, understands that, which is why that kind of longer-term view, the spending review, the spring review, which is multi-annual, is critical. And, you know, it's very difficult to just turn on a tap and turn it off. It does not make for good, efficient government. In particular, you know, if you're recruiting people, you lose their expertise if you can't give them guarantees for what's going to happen in future. So to have that cover from a spending review will be very useful in future.
Great, thank you.
It's been a number of years since we haven't had a 3-year horizon. So we've been doing year by year by year. It's very difficult. And then you finish up in a situation where what you're doing constantly is patching up rather than saying, right, actually, we need to get that bit sorted. So you're constantly patching up, you know, roofs in hospitals or, you know, school buildings because actually you haven't got that long-term view. But, you know, we've taken a risk in some areas. So 21st century schools, for example, you know, we have ploughed money into that. And I think it's worth noting the number of schools in Wales that had RAC compared to England. It's minimal. I think there was one in Anglesey, wasn't there? But, you know, very, very few, because we've had years and years and years of investment, which, you know, has paid dividends. But it's difficult to do that. You know, we want to do that now with the NHS estate, but you're talking about big, big money with some of those things. It's, you know, it's not about necessarily creating new things. It's about making sure that the ones we've got are absolutely where they need to be.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, that 21st Century Schools programme, I mean, the benefits it's given to Wrexham has been fantastic, you know, the change it's made. Obviously, there has been an on and off going debate about HS2 for a long, long time now. So, sort of with that in the background, but on a wider sort of basis, what other discussions we've been having with UK government to ensure that we do get our fair share of infrastructure funding? So you've sort of talked about, obviously we know the NHS and hospitals need a lot of investment, transport we've touched on, but how do we make sure we get our fair share compared to the rest of the UK?
Yeah, listen, there are examples where we haven't been getting our fair share. HS2 is an example which I think was scandalous in terms of the way it was classified as a Wales-England programme, and not 1 inch of the track is in Wales, and I don't think it benefits Wales. I think it's a scandal, and, you know, we will keep on pushing the UK government and making it clear that we think that classification was incorrect. And, you know, it's not just something that's happened, it's something that's going to be ongoing. So we will keep on making the case. That is a slightly different argument from the long-term underfunding that's been happening in relation to rail infrastructure, which is the UK government's responsibility. And, you know, we got about 11% of the track in Wales, and we're not getting anything like 11% of the investment. So there's a recognition that, you know, at least in that area, that, okay, we see now, you know, the percentage of that's been electrified in Wales compared to England, for example. It's totally unfair. So I think there's a recognition. So we will just keep on pushing on that, and that was part of the conversation with Heidi Alexander this morning.
And Lakey's going to come in with a brief supplement.
Very, very briefly, diolch i chi, Prifeidog, am ddod gyda'n pnawn yma. Just very much on that last point that you made, and very, very glad to hear that there's common ground, actually, with regards to the historic underfunding of the railway network in Wales. And I was just wondering whether you feel that there might be a softening of position with regards to the UK government on this matter, and looking to the future, are you hopeful that perhaps the Treasury also might reconsider their statement of funding policy when it comes to the CSR now, and particularly on that classification of HS2, because as you rightly said, First Minister, that really will have an impact in the future, as well as, you know, the historic consequences for lack of investment in Welsh Railways?
I think I detected today a softening. I mean, the fact that we've had a recognition in relation to underfunding, historic underfunding, I think is an important first step. I'm not sure if they'll go as far as to say we're going to reclassify HS2, but we'll keep on making the case. The important thing for me is that we get the investment. So we will keep pushing. We had some positive mood music, but also with a very clear caveat that, hang on, let's wait. There's lots of people looking for money in the spring statement. So I won't feel confident until I see that spring statement.
Yes. Anne Davies, please.
Diolch Gweinidog hefyd. The figures for the number of Welsh farmers impacted by the inheritance tax changes are disputed. We've got the Treasury coming out at about 25%, FUW, Farmers Union of Wales 93%, NFU Cymru 75%, an independent firm of accountants in West Wales 90%. So all are way over the Treasury figures. So Jeremy Moody from CAV said that around 200 farms would be affected every year, which over a generation is 6,000 farms in Wales. And given the higher figure reported, do you still support this inheritance tax change?
So it's not for me to support it or not to support it. It's a UK government decision, and you need to ask the UK government on that. Inheritance tax is not devolved. This, you know, if you've got an issue with this, you have to ask the Chancellor about it.
Can I follow up then, if I may? The SFS, the Sustainable Farming Scheme, is an important policy change. And how can Welsh Government biodiversity, carbon capture, net zero targets be met with less farmers on the land, in addition to the catastrophic economic effect in swathes of rural Wales if this tax policy is implemented? Remembering, of course, that every pound a farmer spends generates £9 within that community. So with the SFS, the inheritance tax is obviously going to affect the implementation of a sustainable farming scheme. So although the tax element is decided here, the implementation of SFS is going to be affected by this decision. So how do you see those two marrying up?
Thanks. And you know, I think there's been a lot of movement in relation to the conversation between the Welsh Government and the agricultural unions in relation to SFS. So there's been a lot of listening, and there's been a lot of movement, and I think there's a degree of consensus now in terms of where we need to be going. And in relation to the interconnectedness between SFS and inheritance tax, one of the things that the Deputy First Minister has secured is that in relation to inheritance tax, he wanted to make sure that if there was a direct impact on SFS, that would be accounted for. So he's had that reassurance from the Treasury. Now, you know, if people go out of business, that's a slightly different situation, and obviously, you know, we'll have to just see which one of those very different scenarios that have been set out is true. But I do think this is something that, you know, if it's of concern to you, you need to probe it with the appropriate authorities.
Just coming back, I can assure you that we are very much so bringing this to the attention of the Treasury, but with little effect at the moment. But we'll keep plugging, as you'll be keep plugging about the train investment, we'll keep plugging about inheritance tax.
Thank you, Anne. Can we move on to Henry Tufnell now, please?
I just had a question about farm funding and the removal of the ring fencing, and was keen to understand your thoughts on that.
Is this in relation to trees?
No, so the UK government's put more discretion in the hands of the Welsh government over farm funding. So in terms of the bypassing the it was originally bypassing the Barnett formula, and now it will come in as part of Barnett consequentials.
Yeah.
And keen to understand what your thoughts and views were on that change. To
be honest, we're not very happy with it. Let's not forget where we've come from, and it was, all this money in the past came via the EU, and there were very clear rules about how it would be spent and what proportion of that came to Wales. It was dependent on how many farms you've got and what kind of farming they do. So, whilst the kind of the amount has been respected hitherto, it's about what happens in future in relation to the Barnett consequential, because whilst if you just do a Barnett consequential, you're talking about 5%, whereas actually when it comes to agriculture, we should be significantly higher than that. So it is a huge concern that has been changed. It's not about where we are today, because today it's been respected in terms of the amount of money that comes that they had before. It's about what happens in future that will not recognise that we have a higher percentage of farmers relative to other parts of some parts of the United Kingdom.
I quickly follow up. We had the Secretary of State for Environment, Food and Rural Affairs gave evidence to the EFRA Select Committee, which I sit on, and he's set out there that there would be an appropriate level of funding for that in respect to those Barnett consequentials. I was wondering whether you'd had any conversations with him and whether you'd expressed the views that you've just set out to the committee there directly to the Secretary of State.
So I haven't had any direct discussions with him. It may be that my Deputy First Minister has, so I can clarify that for you. But, I would be very anxious to know that we won't be losing out in terms of the future. So those kind of assurances would help us a lot.
And Lake's going to come in with this.
Very briefly, Premier Dog, do you think, given that this will also potentially be concerning for the administrations in Scotland and Northern Ireland, albeit to different extents, do you think that this is a type of discussion that could be held by some of the interministerial groups? I know from past evidence that the DEFRA one in particular seems to be well attended and meets regularly. Do you feel that the intergovernmental infrastructure could operate so as to both communicate these concerns, but also, more importantly, perhaps find a compromise that addresses the concerns?
So I think that's a really good question, because I think that intergovernmental infrastructure works really well in some departments and not so well in others. And I think because there's been a tradition in order to come to a position before they went to the EU, there was clarity in terms of like cooperation on that, so that intergovernmental infrastructure was quite well developed for agriculture. That's not the same in other areas. So it does depend on what the background looked like. But obviously we're living in a very different environment now. Brexit has changed quite a lot in terms of intergovernmental infrastructure, and there's things that where we're just working our way through how these things work. So I'll give you an example. I've just come from the EU ambassadors meeting, and there was a lot of healthy rivalry between me and the Austrian ambassador, because actually we are second in the world when it comes to recycling in Wales. And Austria is first, but only from 0.1%. So I said, we're coming after you. But it's really interesting because actually England is a long way behind. And so how does that work in terms of the, if they want to bring in new legislation in England in terms of recycling or whatever, how does that work within the context of a single market? So, what we're not going to do to go backwards and wait for them. You know, we want to be the best in the world. So there are things like that where we just have to work through some of those complications within the context of a new UK internal market. So, yeah, it's complicated.
There's certainly every opportunity we take in this place to remind people how Wales's recycling rates are second in the world, and there's a lot of green eyes, I think, in the chamber. Anyway, let's move on to Eluned Medi, please.
Yeah, thank you. And this is to continue with the public funding and the impact of the budget on our local councils now. As we all know, the local councils are the backbone of public services, educating our youngsters and caring for our elderly generation, and actually public protection we've seen the value of that since COVID and the need to invest. And we've actually had the Bevan Trust Foundation report out 2 weeks ago around child poverty as well, and local governments has a key role in protecting and supporting those children who are living in poverty. We're seeing council headlines now around council tax, and we're actually seeing service being cut. So I'm just wondering how you can explain that, the impact of even receiving more funding, but it's actually not having that positive impact on service delivery in local authorities, and your view on that.
Yeah, thanks. And thanks to you, Eluned, for all the work you've done on local authorities over many, many years. And, you know, anybody who went through COVID together is bonded for life, I think. You know, there was a lot of trauma going on there. And, you know, I think the performance of local government was absolutely extraordinary. And still is. So just in terms of local councils, look, over many years, the way that local councils in Wales were funded compared to what was happening in England was significantly different, and you'll be very aware of that as a former leader of a council. And, you know, there is the increased demand on local government is very, very significant, as you're aware. If you just look at clearly the ageing population, that is, you know, we're in the foothills, really, of where we're heading in that. If you look at education, the massive increase in terms of additional learning needs, huge increase. You know, when we were all in school, I don't know about you, but there certainly wasn't a teaching assistant in my class. You know, it's kind of fairly normal now to have you know, teaching assistants in classes. You've got a lot of support in schools that wasn't there before, and quite right. It's just that all of that is additional. Number of children in care, you know, so all of these things are really expensive. What we're trying to do is to help to get ahead of that and to try and make sure we, in relation to, for example, children in care, you'll have seen we've just had a bill go through the Senedd where we're taking profit out of children's care, and because it's pretty obvious which way it's heading, and you hear about the horror stories of how much local governments in some part of England are having to pay for specialist support, you know, tens of thousands of pounds weekly on looking after children. So, you know, if we're going to do it, why don't we do it in-house so that the kind of profit motive isn't there in quite the same way. So I think that's something we're particularly proud of. But look, once again, it's very difficult because, you know, local government have to make very, very difficult choices, and they have statutory obligations to fulfil. So what's cut is all the nice things that we all like, you know, it's all so they're making really tough decisions in order to focus on those statutory and legal services that are required to deliver.
Yeah. And I think maybe moving on, and can I thank you as well, because yes, definitely we worked through COVID, and it just showed how agile we can be at a time of crisis, but actually the resources we have in Wales in our councils and their ability I was always quite proud to be a leader of an authority where the staff just moved quickly and served the community. I think the challenge is now is how can you represent those local authorities in your conversations with the Chancellor and making sure that there's a recognition, because you mentioned the pressures, but the pressures come from the lack of those preventative services. So the investment should be coming in sooner rather than later, but we're actually dealing with the intensive service instead of a preventative service. And I think that having that, you as an advocate, to make sure that the preventative services are funded is extremely important for local government.
Yeah, no, I think you're absolutely right. You know, getting in early, which is why we're focused on things like the first 1,000 days, making sure that we have things like, you know, Flying Start and, you know, those wraparound support for, in particular, families who find it difficult. You know, and people have really tough lives. You know, a lot of us are very privileged. Some people are born into really, really difficult circumstances, and we have a responsibility to stand by them as society, because partly, actually, you know, everyone can make a contribution, and we've got to give them the tools to be able to make that contribution. And, you know, it's very difficult for some families, and so if we give them the support, then they're more likely to be able to contribute to our broader community rather than be a burden on it. So, you know, that's where we've got to be. So early intervention makes absolute sense.
Hughes, please.
Diolch, croeso. Diolch. So you've talked there about the pressures that local councils are facing, and in North Wales particular, I know that you will have received representations from Conway and others about these pressures. They're not because of mismanagement, they are because of massive demand for social care, temporary accommodation, etc. So you've mentioned already that you've been to meet the Chancellor today, which is fantastic, but like, how are you representing Welsh councillors to the UK government when it comes to the upcoming spending review?
So, you know, we're really clear. You know, what we start with the big picture budget, and clearly, you know, within our manifesto, we've said we want to review the ballot formula. You know, there's some fundamental big picture stuff that we'll always keep pressing. You know, getting more flexibility in terms of how we're able to spend the money. That's quite important and can make a difference of hundreds of millions of pounds of our money. You know, it's our money, but we can't get at it because of Treasury rules. So, you know, those conversations are important. And obviously, if we can get at that money, then there are opportunities for us to see where else we can support. But it's that kind of big picture space, I think, we're in, because, you know, local authority and how we deal with local authorities is a matter for the Welsh Government. So it's the block grant that we need to focus on as a government.
German, please.
Diolch. Just following up from Claire's point, actually, about the pressures on councils like Conway and the disproportionate amount of older people who live in some of those areas, and they've often retired over from England later in life. So that's a pressure that I think is unique to some areas rather than others, because there's that big retired population. So this won't be uncommon across the UK. There'll be other parts of England that have the same thing going on. I just wondered if you'd had any conversations with UK government about that dynamic, and the fact that, you know, people can live their whole lives in one place but then retire to another, and it's councils like Conway and Denbighshire, both in my patch, who kind of pick up the bill for that, of, you know, want to care for them, but it's a real pressure on that authority.
No, I completely understand that, and I think it is a conversation we probably have to have a more in-depth discussion about, you know, how we're going to deal with that, because you know, the irony, you know, some of these people actually are relatively wealthy as well, and they might come in, but then when they get really old, they don't have that support network, and it is up to the council. So whilst, you know, they were wealthy and they were paying income tax in England, when it comes to council tax, you know, they do that when they're a pensioner. It's different. So it's very different. So I think there are some challenges for us around that. You know, I want people to feel welcome in Wales, but I also think we've got to recognise, for example, that in Wales there's a £100 cap on care, domiciliary care, and England is unlimited. Now, we have to be really careful because, whilst we want to welcome people, we've got to get that balance right in terms of responsibility. So I think this is a space where we probably do need a broader and more sensitive and difficult conversation. We're doing quite a lot of work on reforming the care service in Wales. We've got a kind of national approach where we can, because every local authority we're doing different things and paying different rates, and so none of that was very satisfactory. This is kind of on the road to some kind of national care service. What does that look like? What does it mean? But where we can get some consistency, I think that makes sense. But none of it is straightforward, because at the end of the day, it's about where you're going to get the money from. And I don't think we've bottomed that out yet. And obviously there's the review that the UK government is doing at the moment in relation to that. And look, if we could come to a cross-party agreement on how we do that, because it's such a difficult nettle to grasp. But at some point we have to grasp it. There have been governments for decades now who haven't addressed this issue, and the consequences, as you all know, means that we've got a very fragile care system, and it's stopping people from getting into hospital. So it's we all know what the cause of those ambulance delays are. It's the lack of flow through our hospitals because of the fragility of the care sector. I was just with these EU ambassadors. We had 2,000 care workers leave after Brexit, and they weren't replaced. That's not an insignificant number of people. So there are consequences to these things, and we are all counting the costs of those things.
I'm going to move on to Anne Davis now.
We've touched on this before. It's community pharmacy funding.
Oh, yeah.
Pharmacies are integral to our communities, as you've already noted in a previous question. However, every community pharmacy in my constituency of Caerfyrddin note that the drugs tariff doesn't work for them, with examples of repayment of £2.50 per drug, which cost the business about £15 per pack. Sometimes they're reimbursed the cost, but that isn't guaranteed. So why does the Welsh Government really choose to adopt the same basic prices for medicines for reimbursement of pharmacy contractors as set out by the Department of Health and Social Care with the English tariff, in the English drug tariff? So why are we following in England when our pharmacies are very much more rural? In a lot of Wales are rural and are different kinds of businesses.
Thanks. Well, I think first of all, I think it should be appreciated and recognised there's been a significant increase in the amount of money that's going to pharmacies. It's at record levels. In the last 7 years, the guaranteed funding for fees and allowances has grown by 24%. So that's £30 million. So, that's not a small increase. And a 6% increase has been applied for next year. So the reimbursement mechanism, so the arrangement for pharmacies and how they're reimbursed against NHS prescriptions is more or less the same as it is in England, which recognise the prescribing practices is similar. But the reimbursement mechanism for contractors also delivers guaranteed profit for pharmacy contractors. So they get £55 million more for the medicines they dispense in the NHS than pharmacies pay their suppliers. So they should be in a position where that works.
That's not the examples that I've had, but perhaps,
I'm
that's
happy
something
to,
that I need to follow up with you outside this forum, if that's okay.
Yeah, I'm more than happy to give you that. I think there are 689 community pharmacies in Wales. and they're doing tremendous work and taking pressure off our GPs. So it's great. But you're right, we need to reward them correctly. If you'd like, I'm more than happy to send you some more information on that, how it works.
That would be great. So do you think Welsh Government are transparent enough in how the drugs tariff works in Wales?
Well, it's the same thing as in England, so there's no reason why.
No, because in fairness, I didn't know, or we didn't know as a committee until Stephen Kinnock sent us a letter, and that's in public, that's publicly, it's out in the public domain, that Welsh Government follow exactly the same drugs tariff as they do in England. Well, none of us here knew that until Stephen Kinnock brought that to our attention. So that should be out in the public domain, which it will be now, because we've made a point of it, as they say.
Yeah. I think pharmacies, they're guaranteed a level of retained purchase profit. So they, it's there. I'm very happy to give you a bit more detail on this. £175 million is paid to pharmacies as fees and allowances for dispensing prescriptions. So it's not a small amount of money.
We'll perhaps catch up outside this.
Okay. If you'd like to, write to me, and I'll give you chapter and verse on how it works.
That's fantastic. Thank you.
Minister, we're going to move on now to a different topic. I'm going to ask Claire Hughes, please.
Chair. So we know that universities play a vital role in Wales, and we talked before about the vital, the focus of this government on economic growth, and we know that universities are really key in delivering that. So the recent news from Cardiff obviously is very concerning, but we know that it's not unique to Cardiff, nor just to universities in Wales. So the Welsh Government, obviously through MEDA, provides funding for higher education in Wales, but lots of the things that affect universities are obviously reserved matters, so things like international visas, etc. Yeah. So could you just tell us a little bit about how your government is working with the UK government to try and ensure a future for our universities in Wales?
Thanks. Well, I think we've all been really saddened to see what's happened in Cardiff, but I think I think there's also recognition that the way it's funded at the moment is not sustainable and needs a radical revision. I'm of the view that it would make sense for us to do that radical revision with the UK government, partly because we know that 90% of the funding is not from Welsh Government. So, we cannot possibly plug the hole. There are lots of reasons why we've seen a shift. Some of it is because we've got far fewer students from EU countries coming. There's a shift in terms of the international market beyond that. There's also the EU structural funds that used to support the universities in Wales in particular. So there are lots and lots of reasons for it. We did lift the fee cap in Wales, so that gave an extra £21 million. And we were reluctant to do that, but we do have the most generous offer, I think, in terms of support in terms of living support for students in the United Kingdom. So I think that's something to be proud of. But at the end of the day, are these universities sustainable? How are they going to work? We've been given assurances that we don't think any of them are in dire trouble. We don't think there's in any Welsh institution is at immediate risk of failure. But I know that both the Education Secretary and the Higher Education Minister have met with their UK counterparts, and that they are already discussing, what the future could look like together. So those conversations are already happening.
And Lake, please.
Thank you, Chair. And I just echo in terms of your points there, Prime Minister, about the difficulty that the entire sector is under. And further in the West, I know that Aberystwyth University have had to make very difficult decisions in recent years. And perhaps most pressing is the decision that has been taken by the University of Wales, Trinity St David's, to close its campus in Lampeter, which of course is the birthplace of higher education in Wales, and I think outside Oxford, Cambridge and St Andrews, the oldest higher education institution in Great Britain. And the point I think that is sometimes missed in the wider debate about the sector is that there are some areas of Wales, indeed Great Britain, but we're just looking at Wales today, that where the higher education institution has a disproportionate impact or contribution rather to the local economy. And so I know that there are plenty of studies that have been compiled over the years extolling the real benefits of higher education across all parts of Wales. But when you do have situations where in Lampeter now that the campus will be closed, the consequences on that local economy are even more acute. And so appreciating that there are a number of moving parts here, is there anything that the Welsh Government could do in those circumstances where a sudden really decision to close a campus will have serious ramifications for the local area, both economically, culturally and socially? Do you think there is a way that the Welsh Government can help mitigate some of that impact?
Well, not without cutting budgets from somewhere else. You know, there's not a kind of pot of funding sitting there ready to come into the rescue in any circumstances. You know, we are spent out. You know, we're very deliberately spent out. Look, some of these are really difficult, and I absolutely appreciate what you're saying. I think there are the intensity of the relationship between the university and the town is very different in some places. I think, you know, we've also got to look at what's sustainable though, and you know, if we want our universities to be sustainable, they may have to make some difficult decisions, and that's really difficult. But it's a decision for them, and we need to obviously make sure that they do it in the most sensitive way, that they work with people, that they offer alternatives if possible. But in terms of the local community, you know, we don't have a pot of money ready to come in on a white steed to save the situation, no. But I do think that there's recognition, for example, at local authority level, of the importance. And I think this is where the public sector can kind of try and come together and work together and say, right, you know, what have we all got in this space? Where are the opportunities? You know, so is there something that the local authority might be interested in doing in that area that might help to land a different model, something that will work and bring people into the area, but is something different. And I know, you know, that there are conversations going on in that space in some of these instances.
If I may just very briefly, Prif Dog, in terms of the future of higher education in Wales, it's been suggested by some that greater collaboration, indeed even perhaps greater coordination among institutions could be of benefit to help the overall sustainability of the sector. Would you have any view on that in terms of, is there a place perhaps in Wales for us to lead the other nations of the UK in forging or encouraging more coordination amongst our institutions, with a view of allowing then greater specialisms in different areas without perhaps the same level of fear of competition from elsewhere might undercut their investments?
Yeah, well, thanks. You know, I think it makes sense. If we can, we should try where we can to work as Team Wales, if people are willing to do that. You've got to be a little bit careful in terms of competition law, but what I fear is that actually people are gold-plating competition law, so they don't necessarily need to be just adhering to it in quite the way they are to the letter of the law, because there are examples of where other people have cooperated. So there are areas where you could cooperate, but you can't on fees or whatever it is. It's just got to be sensitive and look at what is possible. But, you know, certainly in relation, for example, to the Cardiff example on nursing, which was obviously came as a big blow, and we're very keen to make sure we can keep on training nurses. You know, but there are, I think, 2 or 3 other nursing training establishments in South East Wales. So it's not like we're going to lose all training abilities, and obviously where we can, we'll have to see if they are able and willing to undertake a bit more training, because it's Welsh Government that pays for a lot of that training. So it's our money, and obviously if they're not doing it, we'll spend it somewhere else. But it would be better to plan, wouldn't it? And I think some of what they've been suggesting is we couldn't do that before because competition law stopped us from doing that. So I just do think it's something we've been looking at in terms of how strict is this competition law. But yeah, in an ideal world, let's see where we can make sure we can collaborate if possible.
I'm sure there's some interesting food for thought there, and it would be remiss of me not to mention other less old universities, like University of South Wales, which also does nursing, but also they've noticed a big drop-off in international students, for instance. And again, that's contributing to the financial pressures. So, hearing your words today, it is really helpful, so thank you for that. I'm going to move on to something completely different. David, Chadwick and Steele, please.
David.
How would you describe your engagement with the UK government on the Port Talbot Tata Steel Transition Board, and how is your government working with local councils and communities to ensure that the funding from the Transition Board is as impactful as possible?
Well, thanks very much. And look, I think we're all pretty saddened and depressed about what happened in Port Talbot, but I was really pleased to see that the Transition Board was established, that now there's been money put into it, that we've actually got very close collaborative work with the Secretary of State for Wales, who've been leading on the Transition Board, and she was able to get money out fairly quickly after she was appointed. We continue with that cooperation because it makes sense for us to cooperate in an area like that. This is a major industry where the levers for being able to do things in this space obviously rest with the UK government rather than the Welsh government, and we're moving from blast furnaces to electric arc furnaces. I'm sure we're all very concerned to see what President Trump is suggesting in terms of steel tariffs, and we don't know where that's going to end. It was certainly something I raised with the Chancellor this morning, who assured me that she's very much looking at this situation and is sensitive to the needs of that particular industry.
Thank you. And I'd like to broaden the next question out, because you said, and pick up something that you said earlier, you said that this government, this UK government, is all about economic growth, and clearly what's happening in Port Talbot is having a terrible impact on the economy of South Wales. The Prime Minister clearly believes that devolution is good for economic growth. Welsh Labour have been running Wales for 25 years now, and yet Wales remains so much poorer than the rest of the United Kingdom. The wage gap hasn't closed at all since 1999, and our major industries in Wales are still shedding jobs. So why isn't devolution delivering economic growth for Wales, and where do you think that growth is going to come from? Because the UK government is focusing on projects across the southeast of England, for example, to promote GDP growth across the whole of the UK. But shouldn't the focus really be on lifting up the people at the bottom rather than focusing on the people at the top? And do you think the gap between Wales and England will close during this Parliament?
Well, thanks very much. I think we've got to recognise that what we have in Wales is an older and sicker population. That's just a fact. If you look at the number of people over 65 in Wales compared to the number of people over 65 in England, it's a not insignificant difference. So I think it's something like 21% in Wales and 18 or 19% in England. So, that's not an insignificant difference. Obviously, the other thing is I think there are areas where we're doing better than England. So one of the areas we've really focused on is youth unemployment, because if you don't catch young people when they're young, you there's a real potential you condemn them to a life of unemployment, and that's not what any of us want to see. So early intervention is important. We've got a youth guarantee in Wales, which means that our youth unemployment levels are at 6%. In England, they're at 11%. So, something is working well in that space. If you look at turnover companies in the past year, I think in Wales it's about 8%, and in the creative sector it was about 10%. So it's just there are areas where I think we can point to and say, yeah, things are improving in those areas. Productivity, I think, is a real issue. And when it comes to productivity, there are some obvious things that you can do. You've got to improve infrastructure, you've got to improve skills, and you've got to make sure that that you invest where possible in machinery and technology. The machinery and technology part, you need money behind you to do some of that stuff. So, Business Wales is trying to support where they can to help companies if they want to, and Wales Investment Bank is supporting companies to try and, if they want to invest and improve their productivity. We have things like the individual learning accounts, which I think are really important. So we've got to recognise that actually there are jobs that exist today that will not exist tomorrow, and we've got to equip the people who work in our communities with the ability to change and mid-career, and so we have these individual learning accounts, and what we've done with them is to say, right, where have we got a shortage? Right, let's give people the opportunity to build those skills up in those particular sectors. So we're trying to do what we can there, but productivity is one of the areas I'm really concerned about, and that's why we're going to be having a cabinet meeting on productivity in the near future, because it's something that I think needs a bit of focus. And the other thing just to bear in mind is that we've announced that we're going to be holding an investment summit. It's likely to be happening towards the end of this year, and that's an opportunity for us to put a massive big flag up and say, Wales is open for business, we're inviting you here, and this is a great place to invest.
Do you think that gap will close during this Parliament?
I'm hoping it will close, yes. I'm hoping it will close. We're putting in some of the mechanisms and measures to help to close that gap.
Before I bring in Henry Tufnell, can I you mentioned the tariffs, the potential tariffs coming from across the Atlantic, and you mentioned you had a meeting with the Chancellor this morning. Are there any other sort of follow-up meetings? Because obviously the steel industry is looking with alarm at the current issues with tariffs. Do you have any other plans at the moment?
Look, that was obviously something I brought up, and she reassured me that this is something that very much that she's working on at the moment. And it was also useful to speak to the EU ambassadors, who of course have already said that they're going to take retaliatory measures. And the danger for us, therefore, is that we'll see some steel dumping in the United Kingdom, and that could be very difficult for us.
Very much. Would Henry Tufnell, please?
Thank you. I just wanted to touch upon the UK Steel Council, which has been launched last month by the UK government, and it's expected to advise on rebuilding the industry and developing its upcoming steel strategy in the spring. And I wondered if you could set out the responsibilities of the Welsh government and the interests of the Welsh government in relation to the future of steel making in Port Talbot and more broadly across Wales.
Thanks. Look, we've got a very proud history and tradition of steel making in Wales. It's something that we want to see continue. We recognise that there are opportunities perhaps for us to use steel from which will be made differently if we develop the sources of energy in particular to feed the electric arc furnaces, because that's part of the challenge here is, to make steel you need a lot of energy, and where are you going to get that energy from, and how do you compete if other countries can get that energy cheaper? So I think there are real opportunities for us to link this up with offshore wind and just to try and see how we can use one industry effectively to benefit another. So, we're very much interested in contributing to this UK government steel strategy. And I know that officials in our department are working on that, and we're looking forward to that coming out in the spring. I think things like this change, it means that we'll have to be on our feet in terms of being able to respond. So that's part of the problem here, isn't it? Is that whatever your strategy looks like, if you get a curveball like this, you've got to be able to adjust and adapt. So to see to what extent we can build the opportunities to use UK steel in procurement, for example, government procurement, I think is something we should perhaps explore a bit more.
I also wanted to touch on, you talked about clean energy. I wanted to ask you about skills. We had an exciting announcement last month in respect of Pembrokeshire being identified as a key growth area or key growth region for clean energy. And there's £1 million of funding made available for skills. Mm-hmm. And I wanted to ask how the Welsh Government will prioritise that money in respect of skills mapping in Pembrokeshire.
Thanks very much. Well, one of the things we've done is I've set up a task and finish group to bring together the kind of interested parties. There's a lot of people with interest in this, but it's really about people who are going to put money on the table to make these things happen. And where are the gaps? What's going to happen? What do they think is the time frame for these things? So it's trying to get a bit more practical about when are things going to happen. And part of my concern with the skills piece is you kind of don't want to go too early either. So if we put people in sixth forms through a particular green skills course at the moment, and they come out in 2 years' time, floating offshore wind will probably not be ready in 2 years' time. So what you don't want to do is to build up frustration, watch those people be skilled up, and then leave. So the timing, it's that kind of detailed work that task and finish group is doing now, is mapping out what is the time frame for this, who's going to do what at what point. So, it does have education representatives on there, and certainly there is somebody from further education on that group representing all of the further education establishments in Wales that have an interest in that.
And how does it interact with the net zero skills action plan that Welsh Government have?
So I would expect that group to be aware of that and to make sure that they are coordinating, so we're not duplicating what is already happening in that space.
And obviously we're pleased to hear about the task and the task workforce group, if you like, because in terms of issuing of licences and things like that, it's important to have all the players around the table. Absolutely right. Please, ready for the final question.
Yeah, I was going to ask, just before I go into that final question on that, I do hope that lessons are learned and that they're transferable then to other areas, because in Ynysmôn and the energy project island, I think it is important that work and we don't reinvent the wheel with those projects as well. So I just mean and also that we learn lessons from other areas that have already done that skills mapping and so on as well. Sorry, quickly, and I'll move on.
I'll stop you there because my mistake, my apologies. Jill German wanted to come in as well there. Apologies, Jill.
Thank you, Chair. Do you see me chomping at the bit there?
Yes.
So as Henry has said, the investment in from UK government in the green skills agenda is really welcome in Wales. Yeah. And indeed, we've had some other really welcome funding announcements for example, on Ynysmôn, and then also with the Wrexham Flintshire Investment Zone. So it's really good to see that UK government are taking notice of what Wales needs. So I wondered about all parts of Wales, I suppose, and up in the north in my constituency, there's also a really good opportunity to bring green skills and the green energy sector into that area. So we've got, for example, the UK's only wind turbine engineering apprenticeship, that's the course that's run up there, and there's kind of there's good investment up in the north, but then there's also this corridor across the coast, which I'm really conscious we don't want to miss out. So my question, if you like, is how will you advocate for all parts of Wales with UK government, and particular that stretch in the north, which has historically had issues with sustainable employment and, you know, manufacturing and all those things we had historically have very much gone, and it's a real area for development.
No, I think that's right. And I think this is an example where the Welsh Government has worked really well with the UK Government. So skills is actually a Welsh Government area. Okay, so we're in charge of skills. But, you know, if they're going to lob some money our way, thank you very much, we'll have a bit of that. But we're responsible for delivering it. So, you know, you can't have people helicoptering in and saying, you know, we're going to do this for you. You know, we're the ones with the machinery of government. But this is a really good example of where we're working together, we're cooperating, you know, for the benefit of the nation, and you've got two governments working together. I think this is a really good example of that. So, just in terms of you know, the focus, there will obviously be a more concentrated focus in those areas, you know, where we have investment zones, where we have free ports. So there's you know, we know that there'll be clusters, and we want to see that happening. Actually, in some areas you need to work out if you're not going to get overheating. So, you know, it's quite interesting. In some areas, you know, sometimes, you know, Airbus, for example, you know, they train up so many people in that area, and, you know, you will at some point come to a point where there's just not enough people to train up anymore. So so we've just got to make sure we spread it out so there are opportunities for everyone. And in relation to the skills piece, you know, the representative I happen to know on the Task and Finish group on renewables, on offshore wind, happens to come from North Wales, so they will be all over it. But, you know, we'll have responsibility to look after Pembrokeshire as well.
Of course. Thank you.
Yes. Medi, last question.
Yeah, the last question on it is around the free ports, and it's and I think we've come quite a long distance on the free port. We were actually arguing the case for parity in Wales at one time, and we got that parity around funding in competition with the English free ports. It's how do you see the free ports working for a growth of the economy in Wales, but actually how do you see that partnership between Welsh governments, UK governments and local governments and the business sector moving forward to secure those jobs and hopefully a revival of industry in those areas as well?
Well, as it happens, I was up in Anglesey just a couple of weeks ago, and you know, when it kind of we were able to switch on the opportunities for people to get those tax breaks and opportunities to invest, and I was really delighted to go and visit M-Spark. I heard so much about M-Spark over the years, and it's a really exciting development. It's a model of what can be done, and you know, that's an example of where there are plans now to just expand that model to go further. So, you know, the best thing about this is that you can do more of what you do well, and obviously we need to build on the opportunities that will come as a result of working with companies like Stena, who have obviously a vested interest in seeing the port work and develop well.
I want to before I bring the session to a close, I just want to thank the First Minister of Wales, Eluned, for coming before the committee today, giving us so much of your time, and being here in person really makes a difference. So I just want to say thank you for that, and I must close the session now. Order, order.